Hi folks, you're with Tassless today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the statistics of black crime. Now, and relating that or looking at it, the difference between crime rates of wealthy black families and poor black families. So, the ghetto black families, and contrasting that again with the crime stats from white families that are across the wealth spectrum from rich to poor. Before getting to that, if we look at stats overall of crime, as in violent crime, brutal assault and battery, murder, that sort of stuff. Statistically, and I'm looking at the United States primarily here, but it could apply to anywhere. Statistically, the crimes are committed overwhelmingly by black people, and mostly younger black people, say under the age of 40. Statistically, when we look at the numbers, we see that black people of that age in, say, the United States constitute, say, 4% of the total population, but they commit half the total number of violent crimes. And this seems quite astonishing. Now, most of the crimes is black people killing each other, but if you adjust for age and population, a white person is more than 20 times more likely to be killed or assaulted by a black person than it is the other way around. So white people quite reasonably would feel far more in danger in around black people than it would be the reverse. Similarly, where black on white violence occurs, it's unprovoked. They're just looking for a white person to kill or bash up, unlike the reverse, where there needs to be, or in most cases at least, there needs to be some sort of altercation that led up to it. So anyway, but that's a well-known statistic. Now, the globalist-controlled Western governments the world over, which are, of course, having mass migration forced on them under the instructions and orders of the globalist cabal. There's no more sovereign governments in the West anymore. They do what they're told by the globalists. Then the situation is that they want to put lots of brown and black people into the white West. And so in order to clear the way ahead for that and to suppress any dissent or complaint, they all these Western governments, all of them at the same time, using exact same talking points, they say that the biggest danger by far to Western societies is white supremacy. It's those fucking Nazis, Hitler, and that's always their first go-to. Having Hitler, and you look at any editorial or article about, say, it's an election or about anything about the West at all. There'll be the first paragraph will be far right, the second paragraph will use fascist, third paragraph is Nazi, and by the fourth paragraph we're at Hitler. that's the go-to for the whole sort of thing. So you don't agree with mass migration or even question it. You're Hitler. So the biggest danger is white supremacy. And what we've seen is a bifurcation or a division in how law and order is perceived by the globalists. So the globalists, people murdering each other or being murdered or murdering on the streets and violent robbery or this sort of thing, it's not really that big a deal. It's no threat to them in reality. They don't live in those areas. They don't hang out in those sort of places. They don't go shopping in those neighborhoods. They don't, their offices and their workplaces aren't in that part of town. So they're not really that fussed by things like the murders and the robberies and the bashings and the assaults, and that's very much a who cares thing. But so crime, violent crime in that sense, is confined to certain areas and places that don't affect the globalist cabal, the elites. So they can kind of ignore that. That's really no threat to them. That's a problem someone else can deal with in another part of town. But when you question mass migration, then you are threatening the globalists. You are threatening their power. you are threatening their hegemony. So there's now two legal systems. One is to crush those who may ideologically oppose the globalist government, and those who don't. And black people don't threaten the globalization. They can be used as useful fools and idiots and stooges to complain about white supremacy, which the globalists want. Hey, that's good. But them killing each other, get gang shootouts downtown, drug gangs, and so what? If some white people get murdered, I mean, who cares? And then if a straight white male Christian gets murdered, well, that's kind of desirable in a lot of ways. So that's good. So they've got no problem really with the sort of crime that black people commit. Black people are not committing the sort of ideological pushback that white people are. Now, white people want things like independent courts and accountable governments, and they want free and fair elections and things like that. They want prosperous economies. They want opportunities in economy. These are the things that white people want. They want merit. They want hard work to count for something. Now, all those things are a direct threat to the globalist cabal. So but they're not crimes. They're ideological crimes. And that's a new category of crime the globalists have effectively invented. Ideological crime, real crime, murder, and all that sort of stuff doesn't really matter anymore. That's not a threat to the globalists, or not as they see it. Sure, they'd rather it didn't happen, but they don't really care. And also, it's an expensive business to chase down a murderer who has no fixed address. They haven't really got a good video cam photograph or image of the guy. It's expensive. It's difficult. There's a lot of resources that have to be put in just catching one guy that just murdered some rando Christian white guy. Who really cares about it? He'll be picked up later on some other thing. They'll get him on a traffic infringement, a year down the track. So why bother? Why bother putting resources in? But someone who puts a message online about complaining about mass migration, they've got an address, they've got a job, you can go after them. You know where they are, the resources required to chase them down. You can get them instantly and immediately. You've got them. You've got them, and you can go after them, throw them in prison on some politicized bullshit charge. But they're a threat to the globalist ideology. And so there's crimes, ideological crimes, and actual crimes. Actual crimes are no longer particularly relevant to the globalist order, whereas ideological crimes have percolated to the surface. Ideological crimes, such as questioning mass migration, that's overwhelmingly committed by white people. Therefore, they come out, well, white supremacy, Hitler, Nazis, fascists, that's the big threat. They're not a threat at all, but they're a threat to the globalist cabal and their ideological government, and hence we have the ideological crime. Coming back now to the black crime, this surprised me, by the way. I hadn't anticipated this. Some months ago, I read an article that said that the amount of wealthier black families that had black kids committing crimes, serious crimes like murder and so on, or they would they'd be the police would try and pull them over for doing 100 miles an hour in a 50 mile an hour zone, and then there'd be a police chase. Then there'd be they'd be fighting with police, and there'd be assaults and all sorts of other things going on. And you find that this black kid comes from, in fact, a wealthy home, driving a nice car, and has got all the they live in a nice area that isn't like they don't live in the ghetto or so on. But you hear the kid talking, and he sounds like he's come straight out of the ghetto. But hold on, what's going on here? So wealthy black families have the younger family members, under the age of, say, 35 or so, committing violent crimes at a similar rate, not exactly the same, a similar rate to the black kids in the ghettos. And you say, well, hey, that can't be right. Now, we're not talking petty crime here, like they rip off a bar of chocolate from the local corner store. I don't mean that, but I'm talking the violent stuff. Police chases on car. They don't stop for the police when they're ordered to do so. They say in alcohol testing, they just speed past it, and or other stuff, violent bashings, murder, and the like. The rates are fairly similar between the ghetto blacks and the rich blacks. So why is this so? And I couldn't believe it. I just assumed that given that as soon as black people get a bit of money, the first thing they do is get out of the black area. Now, as much as they say evil white Nazis and fascists and racists and yada yada, the first thing they do is move into a white area. That's what they want. Why do they want to move into these white areas? Because they're peaceful. There's no crime. They're clean. They're the streets are well ordered. There's no shootings down the around the corner and all these. So they move to the white area because it's better. It's a nicer place to live. You want to live in a place like that. You don't want to live in a place in a ghetto where there's killings and murders endlessly going on. You want to live in another place. So the first thing when blacks get money is they move to a white area. Well, certainly they want to move out of the black area, maybe more to the point. Now, when you look at where wealth is in America, which blacks are doing well, and financially, I mean, and there are some sports stars or rock stars, guys like famous basketballers or something like that. Now, those guys are paid big bucks, footballers and the like, and sports people of various types. Could be I don't know, boxers and that sort of thing. So there's that, but they're very small. They're a tiny proportion of the total population. There's a much bigger cohort of wealthy blacks who've become wealthy through affirmative action and diversity, DEI hiring. They've been gifted well-paying jobs. There are jobs where black ghetto people have been gifted director or senior director, executive vice president of diversity in some big multinational, and they can be paid $1 million a year to do that. The selection process, though, is very different. Instead of picking someone like a Thomas Sowell to fill these positions, they've purposefully gone for a ghetto black. Now, I can't believe that if some black Shaniqua talking in ghetto speak sitting in front of you, you'd want to hire her for anything, let alone an executive vice president job and $1 million a year. But that's the mistake. I mean, it's almost like a full 360-degree piece of cynicism here, but they've hired the ghetto black. So you got this ghetto black like Jasmine Crockett, who, by the way, hams up the ghetto speak for political purposes. But even when she wasn't talking ghetto speak, it was still Shaniqua speak, so it still wasn't sophisticated talk. Now these people are being elevated into these positions by the big companies, gifted vice president jobs and senior well-paid jobs that they couldn't possibly earn on any sort of merit. They've got college degrees, they've got tenure as professors in universities, again, all through affirmative action, all through diversity, equity, inclusion. They've never earned any of it. They've never acquired any of it through building or creating or delivering anything. It's just been a gift given to them by the diversity industry, which hopefully is beginning to unravel in the United States and worldwide. So here's this whole bunch of Shaniquas and so on, and who've been elevated into these roles. And again, the first thing they do is just move out of town, but their behavior actually doesn't change. This is the bit that threw me. When they've got all this money and all this prestige, they still can't get out of the ghetto. And something that intrigued me about looking at, say, athletes, say boxers. I remember looking at some boxers that had made millions through boxing, and that they were frequently hovering over bankruptcy. And you say, well, that can't be possible. Boxers like Muhammad Ali that made gazillions, or even earlier than that, boxers like Sugar Ray Robinson and so on, who had done very, very well for themselves at the time, in earnings through boxing matches and so on. They frequently were near bankruptcy, on the bones of their ass, having to borrow money and all these sorts of things. You say, well, it's impossible. I made millions. How can that be? But the point is that their ghetto behaviour never really went away. It stayed there, and they kept on behaving like the tribal black ghetto people that they were. They couldn't stop that behaviour, and And this I found very surprising. And so when you look at the wealthy black families and black people in the United States, and you look at somebody like Fani Willis in Georgia, I mean, she's just a ghetto Shaniqua who has been, gifted a very well-paying, prominent, prestigious prosecutor role, but you listen to the way she talks and the way she thinks and the way she understands complexity, and she's still a low IQ ghetto chick. She's still a low IQ Shaniqua. Doesn't matter how far you put. So when you have affirmative action on the scale that's happened in the United States and elsewhere around the Western world, by the way, you create a new class of, in this case, wealthy blacks who are still ghetto people, though. They're still Shaniquas, no matter what you do, because they haven't earned any of it. Every degree, high school diploma that they've got has been affirmative action. Every university degree they've got is affirmative action. Every position they've been given in government or the private sector is affirmative action. Everything's diversity, equity. They haven't earned a single thing that they've got. Now, when you have to earn something and do the hard work to earn it in a merit system, if you're going to pass the exams at school, your high school graduation, you've got to have put in the work to do it, unless you've got, you're particularly gifted in some way. But some people have photographic memories or something. But in terms of you've got to put in that hard work. You've got to put in the study. You've got to hit the books. If you're going to get elevated to $1 million a year executive vice president job, you have to have accomplished, you have to demonstrate, I've got the credentials, I've got the expertise, I've got the knowledge, but they don't have to do any of that. So it's an artificial wealth they've been given based on an entirely artificial concept of equity and equity outcomes. And if you give a Shaniqua who's never done a spherical work in her life and from the ghetto and give her $1 million a year job, she's still a Shaniqua. Now, some people may spot the opportunity and say, wow, $1 million, I can really do something with this. I can change my life, change the life of my kids. But they're going to their kids and say, okay, well, you got to work hard to do well at school or university or something. And they go, well, you didn't do anything. They just gifted you that fucking $1 million a year job. So don't give me a hard time over hitting the books. So because no one's put any work in, no one's put any skin in the game of success or achieving or accomplishing, so they tend to treat it shabbily. So people like Fani Willis or Letitia James in New York, or those sort of people, they're just Shaniquas wearing designer label clothes. That's all, and they're behaving just like they would if they were living, in and still existing in the ghettos. So this is something that really is now reflecting, given the thought in the crime stats. So they're still having broken relationships, and they're still having an endless array of feckless lovers coming around and relationships on and off and constant dramas and screaming. And so these are the sort of environments that these people are being exposed to. And so it's hardly surprising that the crime statistics are, again, not the petty stuff, the chocolate bar from the corner store, but the other stuff. The more important stuff, assault and defying police and murder and all that sort of. The rates are broadly similar, and until there's somebody wakes up and the light goes on to say, well, until you've got skin in the game, and until you've done the hard work and the heavy lifting to achieve and accomplish and reach some sort of wealthy, acquire some sort of wealth through that hard work, and so on. Until that happens, then you can't break this intergenerational consistency of high crime rates, regardless of wealth. The wealth has to be earned, and right now it's not. In fact, the reverse is the case. Other than a small handful, pretty much every wealthy black person in the US, for example, is there only because of DEI and affirmative action. They haven't earned any of it. You've been a task us today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.